Once, there was a young woman who lived in a very cold part of the world, where the sun rarely shone, so it never got warm. The land was barren and frozen, and the ground was always covered with snow. People kept leaving because it was so impossible to make a living there. But this young woman stayed on, living in a house all by herself. It was impossible for her to think of doing anything else. The only heat she had was from a fireplace, and it was difficult for her to find enough wood to keep the house warm. So, she added layer upon layer of clothing, trying to keep herself warm, and the layers kept her safe from the cold winds. She added so many layers that soon she looked like a large shapeless ball, almost as wide as she was tall. Despite the protective layers, she was still cold and very unhappy, because she spent most of her time alone and trying to keep warm, and she spent a lot of energy trying to keep out of her house anything she was afraid of. She felt so alone. She didn't like going out into the cold wind, and besides, she was too afraid to be out there on her own. One day, there was a knock on her door. She got up from her chair and waddled slowly to the door, opening it just a crack, trying to keep the cold wind from blowing in. She peeked through the crack and asked, "Who's there?" "What are you doing here?" said a man or woman with a strong, firm voice. "Everyone else was notified that it is necessary to leave this place. It no longer supports life. You must come with me immediately." But the young woman, who wasn't sure she could trust this person, protested, saying, "I cannot leave my house. I have no place to go." "Nonsense," said the stranger. "You must leave, or you will die here." And so, reluctantly, the young woman went with him, or her. Fearfully, she waddled out, and they started on a long journey. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "And what will I do when I get there?" "Just trust me," the stranger replied. "I'm taking you to a place where you'll be warm and happy." But the young woman had never known warmth or happiness, so she still felt fearful. Yet, she understood that she had no other choice. So, she followed as fast as she could in her wrapped-up body, struggling to keep up with the stranger. They followed a path that led through desolation and wastelands. They had been walking for several days when she began noticing that the landscape was changing. She saw some shrubs with leaves. Where she had lived before, very little had been able to grow. Then she began noticing some trees with leaves, and she was filled with awe over the color and freshness of the many and various growing plants. Then, one morning, she discovered moisture trickling down her forehead, and she could feel moisture trickling down her body from her armpits. She asked the stranger what the moisture was. He laughed and told her she was sweating, explaining to her that the sweat was caused from being too warm. The stranger suggested that she take off a layer or two and notice how much better she would feel. Timidly, the young woman took off the top 2 layers. She felt much more comfortable, even lighter. She began to feel free and found that she could walk more easily. Each day, as they continued on, she experienced greater delight. The sun was shining more, and the sky was so blue, and she noticed so many enjoyable things that she had never noticed before. There were more trees in many shades of green, and flowers of all kinds in bright and subtle colours. The air was fresh, and the breeze was gentle. She also noticed more sweat. This time, she was eager to take off another 2 layers. She felt much better and much lighter. She was able to walk faster, and the stranger didn't have to stop and wait for her anymore. Also, she found that she was becoming more trustful of the stranger and where she was going. It dawned upon her that she was no longer afraid. Each day she kept feeling happier and lighter, seeing trees, flowers blooming, and birds singing all around. The breeze felt refreshing on her face, and without waiting for the stranger to suggest it, she began to take off layer after layer, freeing her body more and more. One day, they arrived in a land of lovely gardens in full bloom. Nearby was a beautiful, calm, clear lake. She went over to the edge of the lake and looked down into the water, and there she saw herself like she had never seen herself before. She was delighted to see that her true self, her slender self, had emerged from all of those protective layers that had been covering her body. She was surprised to discover that she was quite attractive. She saw her own beauty and her freedom. She felt joyful, full of energy and vitality. She felt like dancing and singing, and the stranger encouraged her to go ahead and dance and sing. She felt so light, so airy. Each day she kept feeling freer, healthier, and more energetic. Her slenderness delighted her. She would skip and run, feeling overjoyed by her sense of freedom. She smiled and laughed more. She was so happy. She just wanted to stay there forever. But the stranger told her that they had not yet arrived at their final destination. There were more wonderful experiences to come. "What could be better?" she asked. "I feel so good and so happy now." And yet, they travelled on. Until one morning, they arrived in a beautiful town. Friendly people greeted her and welcomed her. They told her that she was beautiful. They invited her to join in their dancing and singing. She learned to have fun with them and to share the work with them. She felt she was now a wonderful part of a place where she could really belong. She was accepted as one of the community. She was no longer afraid. She no longer had to protect herself. And each day, her life kept becoming happier and full of joy. You are like that young woman. Every day, your self-confidence keeps increasing. You are becoming more courageous about letting go of some of the layers of protection. Your joy and your happiness keep becoming more noticeable. You are continuing to become aware of your true self, slender, strong, and healthy, full of self-love and acceptance. The self that loves to be who she or he is. The self who is free. And it pleases you very much. Take some time to reflect upon your own life. And remember, you are more than this.